Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Wednesday InstructureCon General Session featuring Instructure's very own VP of Research and Education, Jared Stein.
I've taught in college and university, and I've worked with first grade readers. So when I was asked to teach 8th graders at a local junior high last month, I thought, no big deal. Well, 7 hours, 30 14-year-olds, and me, a teacher they'd never met before. It was chaos. Everyone was talking at once, supplies were getting thrown, and I didn't know what to do. But I knew what I wished I could do. See, I'm an educational technologist, and my mind tends to immediately turn to technology whenever I face a teaching challenge. And if I can make something new and magical or find a new tool to try, even better. So as I was drowning in that ocean of adolescence, I found myself wishing that this was quietly and neatly taking place online. I caught my breath between classes. I thought about what else I might try. Was there anything in the room that I could use? So I looked around, and yeah, there was. The kid's regular teacher. He'd been there the whole time. And of course, he knew exactly what to do. I'd continue to guide the class as a whole, and he'd move around from group to group, helping to keep at least part of the students on task at any given moment. It was really simple, but it worked. The experience reminded me of this quote from the book, The Social Life of Information. Paradoxically, the way ahead is not to look forward, but to look around. The authors are saying, be reflective and think critically about how you use technology. But they're also saying, if you think you need a new tool to solve a problem, you might find you already have exactly what you need. Both of these ideas are important as we talk about education because technology will continually tempt us, for better or for worse, to offload what we've traditionally thought to be the necessary functions of teaching. Data, for example, top of many ed techies' minds, ours included. That's because data can be a lens to look backward and forward, to understand how effective we've been, and even to predict our students' success. So, what could online participation tell us about course design? Can attendance and quiz data tell us if students will complete the course? Should we combine LMS data with demographic data to improve our diagnoses? Data may also be able to serve the goal of individualization, too. Can we use data to automate feedback? To automate communication? Should we use that data to automate instruction? That's a possibility that technology will present to us over and over again, because one teacher and one student is just so powerful. So we look around. We compare what we're doing now with what we've done in the past. We consider the best case and the worst case scenarios for any new technology. I used this image last year, and yeah, it's a little dramatic, but it does suggest what can happen if education becomes too technology-centered, if we incorporate technology for technology's sake, if we trust that data alone can do more for our students than people can. Of course, it doesn't have to be like this. We can choose technology that best serves our intentions, and we have the power to decide how we use it. But we should recognize that technology has biases. Technology is always based on its designers' beliefs about what people do best and what computers do best. Here's one of mine. Because so much of learning is social, every technology decision should be made with a clear understanding of how it will affect our relationships. Does it bring us closer together or further apart? We think about this when we design Canvas. The mobile apps, for example, we didn't want to just deliver content or grades. I mean, any web browser can do that, right? We wanted to take advantage of the device's most popular capabilities. They're really like appendages to our mind these days. They're always connected, and they let us capture ourselves and the world we live in. So we created the mobile apps in the beginning to increase the humanness and the timeliness of those learning interactions. So let's look for technology that serves our fundamental beliefs about education, but at the same time, let's not presume that those beliefs can't change, or that our roles as teachers and students are set in stone, especially not today. For the past 2 decades, we've used this term information explosion to refer to how the internet has opened up new worlds of informal learning, from free encyclopedias to video tutorials, from loosely organized online forums with peripheral experts to massive open online courses led by rock star professors. And this leads us to ask ourselves, what is the role of the teacher in an era of ubiquitous information and technology? One of my teacher heroes, Gardner Campbell, asked a similar question on Twitter just a couple of weeks ago. I think about the profess in professor and professional. What do we profess? Now, this can be read 2 ways. First, what is it that we actually do as teachers? And second, what do we believe in? What is it that we all can honestly profess? The answer was obvious to me. Profess the power of continual learning. That's one thing I think we all believe in. That's what we stand for as educators. It's what the information age demands, and actually it's what student-centered learning is all about. Student-centered learning. What does that mean exactly? If you were to ask 3 of your colleagues, I bet you would get 3 different answers. I've heard it used to mean anything from simply active learning to personalization. Well, the Research and Ed team here at Instructure, we dug into the research literature, and I think we can add some clarity to the conversation. First, by distinguishing key terms related to student-centered learning. That's in the glossary that you can pick up here in the tent. And second, by focusing on student-centered learning's long-term goal, which is to develop students' capacity for self-directed, lifelong learning. So this is more than just an ideal that people like us in education hold. It's something that young people are starting to understand too. The recent EdAssist survey of millennials found that 60% of students would take a job that offered strong learning opportunities over regular raises. Now that could be because over 70% of those same millennials said their education hadn't adequately prepared them for their careers. Now sadly, employers agree. In a 2014 survey, employers identified exactly what competencies are most important in graduates. 83% said work in teams. 80% said applying knowledge to real-world problems. 70% said the ability to solve complex problems. Unfortunately, very few of those employers are satisfied with graduates' abilities in these 3 competencies. But would it surprise you to know that student-centered learning actually can address all 3? See, student-centered learning isn't just one thing. It's an entire ecosystem of techniques and outcomes. In fact, there are so many interrelated concepts and ideas that it can feel a little overwhelming. It can be a little frightening, especially if teachers haven't embarked on that road. I mean, if you were to take this all in at once, you might say, what am I getting myself into? But don't worry. You don't have to roll straight into student-centered learning. In fact, thinking of student-centered learning as a switch that you flip from off to on is actually the wrong approach. Think about it this way. Learning begins in school. It's highly structured. It's almost exclusively teacher-directed. Now, that's only a problem if it ends there, too, because in the world outside of school, Our students need to be able to self-direct their learning in those low-structure environments that seasoned experts thrive in. If we think of student-centered learning as a path that continually gives students more choice, more control, more responsibility for the learning process, we'll see that we can adjust our teaching and our classrooms and our students' expectations gradually. We just need to follow a trajectory that's aimed toward autonomy. So student-centered learning doesn't require that teachers radically change everything overnight, but it does require a willingness to rethink our roles, and it does require having the right tools for the job. I want to share some stories that we've collected from teachers and most importantly from students who are engaged in student-centered learning. We'll be looking at what happens when we make learning active, when we make activities more authentic, when we help students develop their metacognition, and when we increase students' responsibility. Here's the first story.
I am of the philosophical view that teaching is an interactive and social element, and that's given me many options. I also believe in bringing the world inside to that learning management system, because if students are not active participants in their learning journey, then it's meaningless.
Everything that we do at SLA as far as the sort of learning process is concerned comes from our core values, right? Inquiry, what are the questions we can ask? Research, how do we get answers to those questions? Collaboration, how do we work together to make those answers deeper, better, richer? Presentation, how do we show what we know? And reflection, how do we step back and learn from what we've done? That's an iterative process that we do over and over and over again, right? And the idea is that it doesn't matter if you're in math class or English class or art class, you can engage in that sort of iterative process of learning that really creates a vibrant, sometimes very messy, but really authentic and empowering way to learn. In schools all over the country, every time a laptop gets pulled out, people are like, oh, now we're doing a technology project. And we're not. We're writing, we're blogging, we're filming, we're researching, we're crunching numbers, we're doing what we're doing. We want the focus to be on the work, not the tool.
We take quizzes all the time, but the idea is that those are the formative assessments where you're doing just little spot checks for are they getting the base knowledge they need. And then the summative assessment really shows that they're applying those skills. So you're not cramming for a test at the end of the unit, but you are doing some standards-based quizzing to make sure that you have your baseline down so that you can then build with it, when it's time. You can use a laptop, you can use an internet-connected device to just consume content, but we also want to make sure that students are using it to create content. So it goes both ways for them, and that's really important.
I think every student should have some say-so in their learning, and that doesn't have to mean like, oh, I want to learn this, as opposed to I want to learn, something else. Like, I don't like math, so I don't want to learn math. No, you still have to be able to function and learn those basic concepts and skills. But I think it has to do more with how they learn best, giving them options when it comes to homework, giving them options when it comes to maybe extra credit, things that appeal to them, that they could excel at or benefit from or further their learning and understanding. Giving them choices in the simple things, it not only builds motivation, but it'll help them learn.
Active learning, it's the first step towards student-centered learning because it says that students need to do more for themselves. There's this old metaphor of learning as the teacher simply depositing information or knowledge in students' heads. Forget that. Instead, learning is more like creating a trail through a forest. You can use guides and maps, but it's you who does the walking. And the more you retread the path, the more permanent the learning becomes. Now, this translates into actively retrieving the knowledge from your own mind, whether that's by summarizing an article in your own words, or testing your understanding with flashcards, or even simply practicing a technique over and over. It doesn't really have to be complicated to be active. So here's an example that everyone should be familiar with: low or no stakes quizzes in Canvas. These are great for any course that requires the development of students' foundational understanding. Not everyone loves quizzes, but we're reinterpreting the quiz. If we take away the traditional pressures of the quiz by making it ungraded, untimed, and allowing multiple attempts, we can turn the quiz we already know into a learning activity that's really a learning opportunity for students. So in this particular example, the teacher provides these no-stake practice quizzes, and they're generated randomly from question banks, right, to make the multiple attempts more interesting. The course itself is designed so that students can expect to have access to these practice quizzes every lesson, and they'll expect to encounter the same or similar questions in the lesson quizzes that test their mastery. Now, the reason I mixed in an example of quizzes is, they're kind of pedestrian, but they demonstrate the value of giving students what they need, which is opportunities to begin taking responsibility for their own active learning. But that's not where active learning stops. The more we can turn learning into meaningful challenges, the more we can depend on students' own intrinsic motivation to drive them forward. And yeah, once you start to push toward the higher levels of the cognitive domain, toward creating, as Chris Lehman said, active learning can be messy. This is Ray Bradbury at the desk where he always did his writing. And that's where we can really help. As teachers and designers, we can deliberately scaffold learning experiences so students are challenged and engaged and not overwhelmed. Now, this is especially important as you begin to make learning activities more authentic, as the Science Leadership Academy does in their project-based learning model.
SLA is really unique in that it tries very hard to connect everything that we're doing to the world outside, because I think that's something that kids are frustrated with oftentimes in high school, where they are sitting in classroom all day and they don't feel like any of it matters.
So part of the 4-year program at Science Leadership Academy is the kids go out in what's called an independent learning program, where they're able to choose volunteer positions throughout the city or even make up their own. So they get release time on Wednesday afternoons that's usually used for that time. It doesn't happen a lot, but the nice thing about having an independent learning program, right, they get to choose how they're going to interact with the community at large in Philadelphia. And hopefully, find ways to make everything better. That's kind of the point.
With what we have today, with the tools we have available, with the mindset that we can create in our schools, the classroom time is merely the time that we are physically together. But the goals of a classroom and what we try to do by saying this is how we are learning through a lens of science, through a lens of history, through the lens of literature, what have you, is something that transcends four walls and floor. It is something that is ongoing. It is something that allows students to sort of go out and come back together.
I think every day in class, everything is something that I can take to the outside world, and something that I can take home to the dinner table and talk to my parents about, or take to friends from outside of school and talk to them about, or it's like knowledge that I can use when I walk out the door. Yeah.
Authentic learning activities, they bring in content and contexts from the real world to make the subject concrete, and that helps students learn more. It also helps make the subject relevant, and that helps students' motivation. Now, some authentic activities can have students take on a real-world role, and this helps students shift their sense of identity. They're no longer just the student of the teacher, but they can start to see themselves as an engineer or a writer, or as an entrepreneur, a scientist. Now, this can help us instill confidence with the learning process, and it can also help them develop a realistic understanding of what professionals actually do. We can amplify this sense of identity when we help students make a real impact on the world, as Science Leadership Academy is doing. But that doesn't mean you have to physically leave campus. One example is the Wikipedia Education Program, which helps classes organize projects to directly contribute information to Wikipedia. That might be creating a new article to fill a gap, or just dramatically improving an existing article. So at Canvas, we want to facilitate these Outworld projects by letting students submit almost anything as an artifact. If you made something awesome, use your phone to make a video and submit it. If you made a meaningful contribution to Wikipedia, yeah, just submit the URL of your contributions page, and that's going to capture the history of all your edits. Now, if you've talked with me before, you know I kind of love to talk about the URL submissions and assignments. I mean, it's a really simple thing, but it's a way of telling students, please create in your own space, wherever that may be. The LMS shouldn't restrict you. It shouldn't limit you. Establish your digital identity in your own space. Create work for a broader audience than just the teacher. Now, it's a beautiful thing that you can support students in creating outside the walls of Canvas without making your own life more complicated. No matter where students' work comes from, you can still provide feedback, you can still score through SpeedGrader, and it's going to automatically take a snapshot of the student's web page for record keeping. See, the Canvas way is to help students use the tools that they love while teachers still use the tools that they need. And part of the power of learning and working with technology is in that record keeping, not just of the work we've done, but also how we've done it. And that's an important benefit for metacognition, the idea that we can increase our ability to learn by evaluating what we know and how we came to know it.
So, like with anything that's important of introducing new ideas or getting kids to think about things or encouraging learning or metacognition, right? You want to introduce things scaffolded and to then be able to take those scaffolds away.
We do believe that technology should transform the way we think of ourselves as scholars, just in the same way that technology has transformed many of the pathways of our lives. I mean, most of us even, 10, 15 years ago couldn't imagine getting our news online, getting our shopping done online, getting food online, getting all of these different things that have now just become part and parcel of everything we do. And that, if you look at the sort of fundamental changes to the last 20 years, of the way that we consume media, create media, shop, learn, do all of this stuff outside of school. It's time for school to also engage in that transformation, right? It's time for the institutions of learning to be a better reflection of the rest of the world that we live in today.
Well, yeah, I think Canvas has always made it possible for me to give really rich feedback to my students on the fly. So they'll post an assignment and I'm using the comment section, and it's like we have this back and forth. It's almost like text messaging in there. And it's actually kind of exciting they're in the middle of working on something. They're in the room, but because I have all these students working simultaneously, I'm off on the side pretending that I'm doing something, right? So that they can have the independent time and to just work. Meanwhile, I'm actually collaborating with a student on the other side of the room.
In Canvas, when you get feedback, you get to look back at it and say, what did I do wrong? Can I make it better next time? And especially here at SLA, that we have 5 things that teachers look at: process, presentation, knowledge, application, and design. They give you feedback in those 5 specific categories and grade them all equally. And for example, if you get a 16 in process, but you get a 20 in knowledge, next time you'll say, I should be ahead of the deadline and I'll know what to do next time. And if you see that as a running theme in all of your projects, in all your classes, you know what to improve in.
For just a moment, imagine 2 students preparing for an exam. One spends her time reflecting on her knowledge and focusing on the gaps in her understanding. The other rereads the chapter and reviews her notes. Which will learn more? Which will do better on the exam? So metacognition is that ability to understand how you are learning and then adjust your strategies to get better at it. And it's critical for effective lifelong learning because it helps us improve our abilities on our own. When we talk about metacognition, we should also talk mindsets. This is the theory set forth by Carol Dweck based on research that shows students who are taught a growth mindset, the simple idea that their intelligence can grow with practice, with learning, they'll outperform those students who are stuck with a fixed mindset. The idea that their intelligence is innate, what they're born with is what they've got, and it's not really going to change that much. So like mindsets, metacognitive strategies can be taught, but they don't always have to be. In the video we just saw, Nabil talks about how simply engaging in that iterative process of writing, of getting feedback, and reflecting is helpful to develop his own metacognitive awareness. And this is a recurring theme in the research. The importance of that process to learning is why Canvas lets students resubmit assignments by default as many times as they need to. We were actually kind of stubborn about this, right? We want to give students the same communication tools that the teacher has in SpeedGrader, the text, the audio, the video comments, the inline annotations, so that they can be more active in their self-assessment, so that they can begin to try out the things that they see the teacher do in that feedback cycle. And the logical next step, of course, is to introduce peer reviews so students can apply the strategies that the teacher modeled with their classmates. Okay, the last video I want to share focuses on creating ways for students to become self-directed. And unlike the previous videos, this video features only one teacher and only one learner. It's the lifelong teacher-learner, Howard Rheingold. Now, if you don't know who Howard is, he's not a Canvas user, but he's been a catalyst in the world of ed tech for a long time, and he emphasizes the power of social media with a reflectiveness on how that influences us.
Schools have had a monopoly on learning for some thousands of years, and motivated, self-directed learners have been able to learn things outside of school forever. But for the most part, people are conditioned through the schooling process to think that to learn things, mostly you go to school. That, of course, has changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. YouTube is 10 years old at this point. Wikipedia and the web itself are not that much older. I started out using online media to teach about online media, and use of those media has a certain effect. One of the effects is that it kind of flattens the power hierarchy. But I discovered that the more I deliberately give some of my teacher power to the students and ask in return that they take more responsibility for their learning, the more interesting the learning becomes and the more interested they become. And after 10 years, I'd have to say that my main understanding at this point is very few of us, very few educators really have the trust to just cut their students loose to learn. Not that teachers are unnecessary, but students can find things which interest them, that awaken their passions, that fuel their self-learning, and share it with others, and can be assisted and guided and facilitated in that process by teachers. But the teacher needs to trust the student and scaffold it by telling them that they can find something interesting and we'll learn things that you need to learn around that. Cooperative learning is taking a kind of leap from what they're accustomed to, in the sense that most students in most schools are there for their individual knowledge. Part of cooperative learning is teaching each other. When they start teaching us about the things that they are enthusiastic about, when students start working on projects that grow out of their specific passions and interests, then a lot of enthusiasm for learning all the things that are necessary to learn to accomplish their goals can really blossom from that.
Part of what makes some people nervous or hesitant about student-centered learning is that idea that you have to give up control. As Howard says, you have to begin to trust the students. And that's critical if we actually want students to take responsibility at some point for their own learning. So let me share a few examples of how Canvas is being used to increase student responsibility. Now, this first one, it's going to feel like a leap of faith. But the way it was explained to me, it doesn't really sound risky at all. So for over 2 years, on the first day of class, instead of explaining the syllabus, Dr. Steve Emmerman of UVU has had his students write the course syllabus. Now, he provides the framework, which includes the main objectives based on the goals that are provided by the departments. And he says that no class has yet written a bad syllabus. he actually finds that this activity improves students' expressiveness and their willingness to collaborate with each other. And that's really critical because he uses the flipped classroom model where students are working in groups every day when they're face-to-face. You know, you can do this quite easily in Canvas, I'm sure. Either you have students draft the syllabus off of a template that you provide through collaborations, or you just create a syllabus page and give students editing rights. Now you can do that for one page, you can do that for all of the pages in your Canvas course. It's one of those hidden settings, but I have seen some teachers set the default for all course pages to allow student editing. And this is often done so that students, individually or in groups, can take on the task of updating content or even creating the entire course curriculum. So this could be a loosely structured or a highly structured activity. Just FYI, the current record number of Canvas pages created within a course by students, it's just over 600 in one semester. Not like there's a competition or anything. Okay, if letting students have more control in the course space isn't right for you, there's always the group spaces. These give students all of the communication and content tools that you have as a teacher in the course. And this is really interesting. So these charts show how discussions and conferences, the primary asynchronous and synchronous interaction tools in Canvas, are used. The bars represent the percentage of usage that's initiated by students or by teachers. So as you might expect, students are much more likely to initiate these conversations in their own group space than in the course space. I mean, it might seem kind of obvious, but I think the message is if you want students to take ownership, to take responsibility, give them a place to do it in. Okay, one of my goals for this session, as you can tell, was to share stories and examples that help you understand the potential of student-centered learning, and maybe look at some of the tools that we're all used to a little differently. And that's really what InstructureCon is all about, right? We share and we discuss so that we can rethink and reinterpret both our practices and the tools that we use, so that we can all benefit from our partnership. Now, at the beginning of the talk, I suggested that it's easy to be attracted to something brand new, kind of hand-wavy and flashy. And of course, there will be times when we actually do need a new technology to accomplish the job. But our goal with Canvas is to make it as flexible and forward-thinking as possible, so we can keep our tool bench as uncluttered as possible, so we can have all the right tools ready at hand. That, to us, is the best way to be prepared to adapt to changing times and to address new educational models. Now, sometimes we just need to combine tools to solve a problem. And that's why openness, interoperability are foundational to the Canvas way. This means we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to always bloat the platform by creating our own version of every new gadget that comes along. Instead, you just integrate the best of breed, the real-world tools. And if in doing so, we can support students' authentic learning by integrating the tools that we're using outside the LMS already, the tools that students might expect to use in their careers, all the better. Here's one example that we just signed into partnership with Microsoft. So people who love Office 365 or the new Office Mix or OneNote can take advantage of better integration between these tools in Canvas. Eastside Preparatory School in Washington, they're avid users of both Canvas and OneNote. They're pretty excited by this partnership because students use OneNote for every single assignment. And they already use Canvas for the integration and feedback loop around it. This will just eliminate some of the steps, make it more seamless, and as Jonathan Briggs up at Eastside Prep tells me, it's going to increase usage for both tools. So being an open platform and integrating with real-world tools doesn't mean we stop making things ourselves, but adhering to open standards does mean we can get a lot more creative in how we build to address each new challenge. So as we've researched trends like competency-based education, of course, we start by asking, how much can we do in Canvas already? How much could be built on top of Canvas using our open APIs and the LTI standard? And then, what would we have to build into Canvas Core to make it a great experience for everyone? So in any case, right, the Canvas way is that when we do introduce new things, we do so gradually. We try to make those improvements small and iterative. And sometimes you don't notice that because it happens over time, but it's important that we do so in a way that doesn't disrupt the work of teaching and learning. So when we design for teachers, we design for students too. And I think about examples in the past year like Learning Mastery View of Outcomes. It helps teachers, it helps students. Or the recent updates to groups, or even the new files area. Now, when we say the Canvas way is student-centered, we don't mean only when it's convenient. We don't mean only when the tool can work for students like it works for teachers. We're going to continue to build features that are designed solely to empower students. And that's just because it's the right thing to do. So most recent example, kind of a small thing, it's the student submission export. So students can download all of their assignment work from Canvas from all of their courses at once. It's our way of reminding students that their work doesn't have to be submit it and forget it. The system doesn't have to be a black hole where you can't get your data out. As I talked to students for these student-centered learning interviews, I asked them how their teachers used Canvas. I found out what worked for them. I found out what mattered the most. And there was a common thread. They all said that one of the most important things a teacher can do with the LMS to support their autonomy and their success is really just to provide a clear, organized framework for learning. So it's cool that I get to show you the new Canvas user interface today. But before I do, ask yourself, think about it for a second, what makes a good LMS interface? Well, it should look nice, right? It should be visually appealing. But I think more importantly, it should be super simple. It should make navigation obvious and give you quick access to the places where learning happens. And it should make sense in terms of the navigation you're already used to. So let me walk you through it. The new Canvas dashboard shows courses as cards directly on the homepage. So we're saving both students and teachers some needless clicks. Now, the cards have colors, and those colors are customizable so that it's reflected throughout Canvas to help students make sense of course activities in places like the calendar. We've kept the activity stream that you're used to, so you can see a detailed view of what's new. But the idea behind the course cards is really to make it easier for students to go directly to specific Canvas activities like discussions. Now, native mobile apps, they still provide the most robust experience on small devices, but at the same time, we want to support mobile browsers. So of course, the new UI is fully responsive to work great on tablets. Right on. I'm not even done yet. So if you want to find out more about the new Canvas UI, stop by the product booth anytime this week. You can also turn it on in your beta instance right now. It's behind a feature flag. It's beta, but give it a spin and let us know if we're on the right track. You know, one of the things that I really like about this UI refresh at this point in Canvas's history, it takes me back to where we started. We made a bet that easier to use equals greater adoption. And that's how you grow communities of innovation on your campuses. Hopefully here, this will also mean that more people can create stories of student-centered learning. Speaking of which, I couldn't have done this session without the students and teachers at Canvas schools who are willing to share their experiences. So thanks to University of Central Florida and the Science Leadership Academy and Utah Valley University, as well as some others. Canvas was really designed to enable stories like this, and we rely on you to continue to share your stories of student-centered learning here at the conference, of course, but also beyond. And the new Canvas community, which a lot of you are familiar with, it's really the perfect place for this kind of sharing. So whether you want to post in the instructional design forums or in a higher ed or a K-12 community, tag any of your posts about student-centered learning. What else? Student-centered. Okay? So this will help us grow the community and maintain our momentum out of this conference. It's also going to help us at Canvas know how well what we're doing with the product supports our shared beliefs about education. You can also share your student-centered learning activities. I'm lucky, I get all the fun announcements. As of today, Canvas Commons, our learning object repository, is out of beta, and it's available to all Canvas clients. You just have to contact your customer success manager. They'll be ready to turn that on for you. So I hope we can expect to see a lot of examples of student-centered learning popping up on Commons, tagged, of course, with student-centered, yes? Okay. It's not always obvious how we can make our classrooms, whether those are face-to-face or virtual, more student-centered. And considering all the different ways that we can be student-centered, yeah, it can easily feel overwhelming at first. And that's why events like this help, right? To prove that it's not magic. To prove that, as Chris Lehman says, it's easier than you think. It requires tools that are simple and flexible, and it helps to have someone you trust show you how it's done. But we can take this one step at a time. Let's figure out how to give students everything they need to become independent learners within and beyond the walls of formal education. Not just for the sake of saying we're student-centered today or tomorrow, but for students themselves to make their own tomorrows. Thank you. And we do have some time for Q&A. There are mics floating around.
Hold it close to your mouth.
Okay. Jared,
Hi.
can you give us some details on the timeline on the new interface, please?
Okay, so the new user interface is beta, and it's available in beta for people to play around with exclusively in that environment. As far as the more direct timeline, I would just ask the product folks at the product tent. Hi.
Hi. Question about the Canvas Commons availability. Is that extending to self-hosted as well?
It is not extended to self-hosted yet. No.
Yet? Or?
Well, I mean, I can't comment on that directly. The Commons team is available to discuss further. But, you know, yeah, we want to make it available to everybody. Yes?
Hi, I have a question about accessibility.
Sure.
The new UI has lots of very pretty, colorful squares and colors that are reflected in the calendar. I was wondering if there's been consideration given to users who are colorblind or visually impaired in other ways.
Absolutely. So we've been doing a ton of work on accessibility for Canvas today, and we've been doing the same amount of work for the new UI. Brian Gates will talk a little bit about accessibility tomorrow, but absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Have a great week.